Welcome back to GEEK INK. Today, we continue the story of Absolute Batman, starting with issue 6, and going all the way to issue 13, where the comic run is today. You can check out my video covering issues 1 to 5 if you haven't seen it already, or jump ahead with the timestamps in the description below. Thanks for being here, and consider subscribing if you enjoy. Without further ado, let's jump into the harrowing world of Absolute Batman. Absolute Batman, Issue 6. Bruce stumbled through the cracked glass doors of Croc's gym, blood still wet on his hands, his vision swimming in and out of clarity. The air smelled of sweat, iron, and rust, an old Gotham stench that hadn't left since the 90s. From the shadows, Waylon Jones was guarding the place, keeping watch for the party animals. For a moment, they only stared at each other, the man and the man beneath the mask. Then Bruce's voice, hoarse and low, broke the silence. He told Waylon that he was Batman, that he needed his help. Out on the street, Martha Wayne slipped one of the party animal masks over her face. The inside was still damp from someone else's breath. Through the eye holes, she saw the projection on the nearest wall, the payouts, vast sums of money flashing like neon promises, rewards for violence, $1 million for killing Jim Gordon. A group of gunmen appeared from the fog, their rifles trembling with greed. They demanded the crate. Gordon raised his own gun and shouted for Martha to run, but she didn't. She refused to leave him, even as the danger drew close enough to smell. Across the city, a train screamed through the night. Inside, Julia Pennyworth sat alone, watching the lights flicker. The party animals struck suddenly, metal tearing and glass shattering. They swarmed the train, and within moments Julia was gone, abducted into the chaos. Back at Croc's gym, Bruce stood before his friends. His body trembled as he told them the truth, that he was Batman. Silence followed, heavy and sharp. Anger burned in their faces, all except Eddie, who only shrugged and said he'd worked it out weeks ago. Despite their fury, none of them walked away. They would help him save their city. Eddie's Riddler system spat out calculations, green text flooding the monitors. The party animals network was too vast to kill, he said, but Gotham's local server could be crashed. Bruce understood immediately. It was on Sionis's yacht. Ozzy agreed to fly him there in his battered single-engine plane, though his voice dripped with betrayal. He cursed Bruce for lying, for treating them like pawns. Still, he flew. As they neared the coastline, Ozzy warned that the fuel was barely enough to return to Gotham, that he couldn't wait for him. Bruce nodded, replying that he wasn't asking him to. Then he dove. He hit the yacht hard, right on top of Sionis's DJ, a man called Dr. Benjamin. Without a word, Bruce pulled a life jacket over the man's chest and threw him overboard. Next came Kiddo, small but vicious, attacking with a knife. Bruce lifted him effortlessly, strapped a jacket on him too, and drop-kicked him into the black water. The last of Sionis's entourage, a bikini-clad woman called Sweetheart, took one look at Batman and leapt overboard herself. He tossed a life jacket in after her, a silent gesture of mercy. Back in Gotham, the gunmen surrounding Martha and Gordon demanded the masks from the crate. Without them, they couldn't claim their money. On the far edge of the city, Alfred Pennyworth stood at an airstrip beside a private jet. The night air howled around him. Julia, bound and furious, refused to leave. She wouldn't abandon Gotham, wouldn't abandon the people she loved. Alfred's face hardened. He snapped the handcuffs around her wrists and forced her up the steps. She told him that when she was little, she dreamed of going on adventures with him. But now there was nowhere in the world she'd rather not be. If they took off, she said, she wouldn't have a father anymore. Alfred gave the order. The plane began to roll. On the yacht, Sionis, Black Mask, came for Batman. His words were like poison, a stream of nihilistic madness about power and chaos. But Bruce was beyond patience. He tackled Sionis through a wall and into the yacht's gym, slamming medicine balls against his mask again and again. The floor buckled beneath them, giving way into the chamber below, the room where Sionis kept the death masks of his victims. Bruce kept striking, every blow echoing through the ship's metal bones. Sionis fought back, looping a cord around Batman's throat, choking him. But Bruce drove the pointed ears of his cowl through Sionis's mask and into his eyes. He fastened a life jacket around him and threw him into the sea. Sionis's voice rasped through the night, warning that Batman had no idea what he'd done. In Gotham, the men with Gordon and Martha argued over their reward. They would kill the mayor, they decided, and split the money, but spare Martha. They told her to walk away. She didn't. She said she'd seen their faces, and if they were going to kill anyone, they should start with her. At that very moment, on the yacht, Bruce pulled the pins on a string of grenades. The blast tore through the server room, destroying the party animals network just as the gunmen were about to open fire. The system went dark. One of them asked if that meant there was no money. Martha answered by punching him square in the jaw. The others dropped their weapons and scattered. The yacht exploded, a roaring inferno on the Black Sea. Batman was thrown clear, tumbling into the waves. He sank unconscious into the deep until his body struck something solid, the roof of the submerged Batmobile. It rose through the foam, surfacing beneath the stars. The canopy opened, and Alfred climbed out, his clothes soaked, his eyes fierce. He pulled Bruce into the cockpit and began tending his wounds, murmuring that if he was sticking around, Bruce was too. And somewhere far from Gotham, in a place that smelled of antiseptic and blood, the Joker lay on a medical table. His skin was bleached white, his veins green and pulsing. Tubes ran from his body to the infants surrounding him, tiny transfusions keeping him alive. His assistant entered the room and whispered that Black Mask had failed. The Joker smiled thinly, his teeth slick with crimson. "Get Bane," he said. Absolute Batman, Issue 7. 1 month had passed since the party animals' rampage tore through Gotham. The city still bore its scars, shattered windows, boarded storefronts, the lingering smell of burnt asphalt. But the headlines had already moved on. Hamilton Hill had defeated Jim Gordon in the mayoral election. His first act was to place Gotham under martial law, a decree framed as protection from the one he called the greatest threat of all, Batman. Armed patrols swept the streets, searchlights carved through the smog, and the city's heart seemed to pulse under the boot of its own fear. In the old part of town, beneath a dying street lamp in Crime Alley, 4 men gathered in silence. Waylon Jones stood with his arms crossed, his scaled skin gleaming in the cold light. Beside him were Harvey, Eddie, and Ozzy, each of them older now, carrying the weight of too many years and too much guilt. They were there to remember a man they'd once called a friend, Matches Malone, another kid from the neighborhood who'd shared their corners and their fights and their bad decisions. A small memorial sat between them, a flickering candle pressed into a cracked bottle. Waylon broke the quiet first. He asked if anyone knew what Matches had been doing lately, who'd seen him last, where he'd been. The others shook their heads. Then a voice came from the darkness. Bruce stepped out of the shadows, gaunt and pale beneath the yellow light. None of them had seen him since the night he'd stormed the party animals' yacht. His presence alone brought the air to stillness. He told them that he knew how Matches had died. A week earlier, Bruce had reached out to him. Matches had always been a forger, and Bruce had needed documents, fake papers to get himself onto the work crews building something called Ark M. When they met, Matches had passed him the forged credentials and grinned, saying he'd already snuck onto the site himself. He'd spent the last week inside, gathering evidence. The place, he'd said, already had prisoners, even though it was still under construction. He had pictures and videos stored on his phone. Then, right there in front of Bruce, Matches had collapsed. Blood had poured from his nose, his eyes, his mouth, from every pore of his skin. He convulsed once and went still. Some kind of biological weapon, Bruce realized later, had killed him. A toxin no one could trace. Now, standing among the friends of his youth, Bruce told them the truth. They listened in silence, faces lit by the trembling flame. He said he wanted them to know what really happened, and promised that he would get justice for Matches. He turned to leave, but Waylon stepped into his path. They needed to talk about Batman, he said. Bruce's eyes lowered. He told them he should have kept them out of it, but the others pushed back. They reminded him that he'd relied on them before, that their skills had helped him again and again. Bruce shook his head. After what happened to Matches, he couldn't drag them further into this. He was going alone. Waylon's growl rumbled in the stillness as he warned him. If Bruce stayed on his current path, it would kill him. The data on Matches's phone had contained more than photos. Among the files was a list of scientists consulting on the Ark M project. One name stood out, Victor Fries. He was listed as the head of a company called VCore, headquartered right there in Gotham. According to city records, the building was pulling enough power for 10 city blocks. 3 days after the memorial, a freak snowstorm swept over the city. The sky turned white as Bruce glided high above the streets, heading toward VCore. The cold bit through his suit, the snow thick as smoke. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the storm stopped. The air went still, unnaturally still. Below, floodlights blinked on. The GCPD had spotted him. Their new surveillance grid, technology gifted by Black Mask before his fall, locked onto him with mechanical precision. Predator drones whirred through the air, opening fire. As Bruce dodged the gunfire, his comm crackled. Alfred's voice came through from London, sharp and low. He'd been tracing leads on Match's death. The autopsy listed the cause as bacterial infection, Alfred said, but the strain didn't exist in any known medical database. No record, no taxonomy, nothing. A ghost pathogen. Bruce cut the line. He had reached VCore. Inside the building, he moved like a shadow, dressed as a city engineer. The name on his badge read Pennyworth. He passed through corridors chilled by artificial air until he found the CEO's office. One wall was a mural of ice, slabs so clear they seemed to glow, and inside them were shapes, prehistoric beasts, frozen mid-roar. A man entered, wearing a VCore jumpsuit. He introduced himself as the director. Bruce gave his cover story, and the man smiled politely, saying he was welcome to inspect the specimens while he worked. Victor and Nora Fries, he said, had always been collectors of the strange. Bruce asked whether Victor and Nora still ran the company. The man's eyes brightened strangely. In a sense, he said. Then he pressed a button on his desk. A shutter lifted behind him, and the temperature seemed to drop. Bruce stared. Frozen behind the glass were Victor and Nora Fries themselves, encased in solid ice. The man introduced himself as their son, Victor Fries Jr., and said that this was what his parents would have wanted. They loved the ice, he told him. Bruce's tone stayed even as he asked what VCore actually did. There were almost no public records, no corporate filings. Victor explained that they specialized in cryogenic preservation, freezing the terminally ill until cures could be found. Bruce asked if anyone had ever been successfully revived. Victor smiled faintly. He said that he had been. As a child, his parents had treated his illness through cryotherapy. While Victor turned toward the frozen figures of his parents, Bruce quietly scanned the office. His eyes caught a small vial on the desk, a sample of frozen prehistoric bacteria. His pulse quickened. Victor kept talking, his voice softer now. He said his parents had promised the process would be like a peaceful sleep, but it wasn't. He had felt everything, the pain, the cold. It had burned through him. As he spoke, his skin began to shift in hue, the color draining until it turned pale blue. His veins darkened. His eyes flared red. Bruce spun around, muscles tensed, but it was already too late. Victor stood towering over him now, something monstrous emerging beneath the human face. He reached out, his hand closing around Bruce's jaw. The touch seared cold into his flesh, and blue veins spread across Bruce's skin where Victor's fingers met it. The air filled with frost. Absolute Batman Issue 8. Bruce's lungs burned as he woke. His eyes flickered open to the dim blue light of a laboratory, cold, sterile, and humming with machines that pulsed like a frozen heartbeat. Rows of containment tubes lined the walls, each filled with a pale, cloudy fluid that rippled faintly as though something inside had moved. Above him, Victor Fries loomed in silence, his skin faintly luminous beneath the lab's cold fluorescence. Bruce tried to struggle, but his wrists and ankles were bound in iron clamps. The sound of liquid gurgled nearby as Victor pressed a sequence of buttons on a console. "You'll understand soon," he murmured, though Bruce barely heard it through the fog in his mind. The chamber door sealed with a hiss. Then Victor pulled a lever, and the tube around Bruce flooded with freezing fluid. The cold struck like knives. His body arched against the restraints, his scream swallowed by the rising frost. His heartbeat stuttered. His vision tunneled into light and shadow. Every nerve in his body screamed as the temperature of his blood plunged. The world dimmed to fragments, ice, light, the rhythm of his fading pulse. And then memory took him. He was back in Crime Alley, the night air heavy with smoke and rain. Wayland's eyes glinted in the darkness, reptilian and angry. They were shouting. Bruce couldn't remember the words at first, only the heat in his chest, the shame that burned behind it. Wayland had called him a coward, said he was running from himself just like Matches had. The name had been enough to push Bruce over the edge. He had swung first. Wayland didn't flinch. The fight was brief and brutal. Wayland was stronger, faster. He slammed Bruce into the wet pavement, his claws glinting under the streetlights. "You're trying to kill yourself as Batman," he told him. "Just like Matches did with his stunts, his jobs, his fake bravado. Because you can't stand what's left of you." Bruce had spat blood, glared up through the rain. Wayland's voice softened, if only for a moment. He said Bruce was still that same kid Thomas Wayne had taken to the zoo, the one who'd gone into the bat enclosure while Thomas was shot in front of him, that he'd been blaming himself ever since. Wayland's boot pressed into Bruce's chest. "Matches let guilt eat him alive until there was nothing left," he'd said. "Is that where you're heading to, Bruce? The same place he ended up?" The words echoed through the cold darkness as Bruce's pulse slowed. But then, something deep within him shifted. The memory sharpened into resolve. With a surge of adrenaline, Bruce snapped his wrist free enough to reach the concealed batarang strapped to his suit. The metal blade flicked open, glinting in the frozen light. He jammed it into the side of the tube, the glass spiderwebbing with cracks before it burst. A flood of icy liquid cascaded over him as he dropped to the floor, gasping. Minutes later, he was Batman again. The armor sealed over his bruised skin, the cowl hiding his pallid face. He moved like a shadow through the corridors of V-Corps, his breath visible in the air. In the CEO's office, Victor stood before a massive screen, speaking into a secure line. His voice was calm, clinical. He reported to his unseen employer that the snow blanket in Gotham was entirely artificial. Each flake, he said, was embedded with microscopic genetic markers capable of collecting DNA from anyone it touched. They already had genetic profiles for 92% of the city, and the number was still climbing. Batman crashed through the door. The explosion of wood and glass drowned out Victor's final words. Flames roared as Bruce leveled a flamethrower, sending a blazing arc across the room. Fire met ice in a hiss of steam and fury. Victor barely flinched. He moved through the flames with inhuman resilience, his muscles corded, his strength multiplied by the cold that coursed through him. Batman fought with every ounce of strength left, but the hypothermia still gripped his bones. His strikes were slower, his breath heavier. Victor roared and struck back, throwing Bruce across the room like a doll. Then he pressed another switch. Around them, the containment tubes opened one by one. The frozen patients inside began to move. Their skin was pale, their eyes vacant, but they obeyed him without hesitation. Victor's experiments, his preserved subjects, had become extensions of his will. They surged toward Batman. He fought them off as best he could, the flamethrower spitting short bursts of fire that turned to vapor before reaching its mark. The infected moved without pain, without fear. Each impact drained his remaining strength. They overwhelmed him with sheer numbers, a tide of cold flesh and mindless strength. And then, through the chaos, Wayland's voice echoed again in his head. "Crime Alley people are survivors. You want to die, Bruce?" And his own voice had answered, low and raw. "No." The memory gave him just enough clarity. It wasn't a battle he could win. Batman hurled a smoke grenade, shattered a window, and dove through the storm of glass into the night. The cold air cut his skin as he fell, his cape flaring open. He landed hard and rolled, immediately tapping his communicator. "Wayland," he rasped into the static. "Something's wrong with the snow. Don't go outside. Call the others. Meet me when you can." But Wayland never heard it. At the door of Croc's gym, 3 men in black suits were already waiting. They greeted him with polite smiles before the stun baton struck the side of his neck. Wayland collapsed, his body twitching. The men worked quickly, drawing a vial of his blood and running it through a portable analyzer. "Perfect specimen," one of them said. They covered him with a black tarp, lifted him onto a gurney, and wheeled him toward a waiting van. The doors slammed shut with a metallic clang. The license plate reflected the streetlight for only a second before disappearing into the night. Destination: Ark M. Absolute Batman Issue 9. The conference took place in neutral Bialya, a country that had learned long ago to profit from the chaos of its neighbors. The air was dry and still, thick with the scent of sand and diesel. Inside a dimly lit hotel suite, two men sat across from each other, leaders of nations that had been at war for a century: Croc and Kondak. Generations had lived and died beneath their flags. Sons had become soldiers before learning to write. Daughters had buried fathers they'd never met. The war had consumed their families, their homes, their faith. And now, at last, both men were too tired to hate. After hours of negotiation, they reached an agreement. The words felt heavy on their tongues: mutual recognition, borders, reparations, peace. For the first time in living memory, peace had a shape, a signature. They rose from the table, their hands trembling as they shook. Tomorrow, they would announce it to the world. But when they opened the door, they saw blood, a red pool seeping slowly under the threshold, spreading like ink across the marble floor. The door creaked wider, and a figure filled the frame, a giant of a man, muscles coiled like cables beneath his skin. His face was hidden behind a black mask, his body threaded with thick tubes that hissed with a venomous rhythm. Bane. His voice was deep and cold. He told them that one of them would die, and the other would claim responsibility to reignite the war. The leader of Kondak stepped forward, defiant, even in the face of death. Omar, the leader of Croc, hesitated only a moment before surrendering. Survival was easier than martyrdom. Bane reached out, his gloved hand closing around the Konki president's skull. The sound was brief, wet, final. The body crumpled to the floor. He turned to Omar and told him that tomorrow he would order an escalation of hostilities. Then his communicator buzzed. A cold voice on the other end gave him new orders. JK Holdings, the target, Gotham City. 2 weeks later, Gotham burned with quiet war. Waylon Jones had been missing for 14 days. In that time, Batman had waged his own campaign across the underworld. Relentless, sleepless, brutal. The Maroni and Falcone gangs were nearly wiped from the streets. Hospitals overflowed with broken men whispering his name. None of them knew anything about Waylon. None of them ever would. So Batman turned elsewhere. He contacted Barbara Gordon through a communicator hidden in the mask he had abandoned, the one she had kept instead of submitting as evidence. Her voice trembled with surprise when she heard him. He asked her to find out what had happened to Waylon. She agreed. Hours later, she pulled his police file. They met under the faint yellow light of Gotham Zoo's cracked sign, where the sound of caged animals carried on the cold air. Barbara asked why he had come to her. He told her she was a good cop. She opened the file and told him what she'd found. Waylon had been arrested and imprisoned in Ark M for breaking curfew. Bruce gathered with his friends and Alfred in the old study. The rain beat against the windows as they read through the report. None of it made sense. No one was sent to a maximum security prison for something so minor. Harvey leaned back in his chair, grim-faced. The city had already seized Waylon's property through eminent domain, an act reserved for the permanently disappeared. Alfred spoke next. He said there were rumors, dark and whispered, about what was happening inside the Arks. Bruce told them what he had overheard Victor Fries say, that the snow falling over Gotham carried genetic markers, tagging every citizen it touched. Oz rubbed his temples and asked how Ark M could already be operational when construction had only begun months ago. Harvey revealed the answer. JK Industries had purchased the land long before, the ruins of a 19th century hospital that had burned down decades ago. They had been developing the site in secret ever since. Ark M, he explained, still used much of the original underground piping and ventilation. Bruce spread the old blueprints across the table, pointing to a narrow access shaft beneath the main structure. He believed he'd found a way in. Eddie promised to build a device capable of shutting down any electronic surveillance, and Harvey vowed to get Waylon into witness protection in Metropolis once they escaped. Oz hesitated. He said they should flee the city while they still could. What Bruce was planning was madness. Bruce's temper flared. He shouted, slamming a fist onto the table. Oz didn't flinch. He said that just because it was crazy didn't mean it wasn't right. Elsewhere, in a quiet office packed with campaign signs and fading posters, Jim Gordon and Martha Wayne packed up the last of their things. The television droned in the background, reporting on Mayor Hill's latest decree: expanded curfews, increased military presence, the tightening of Gotham's iron grip. Martha told Jim that he couldn't just walk away. He needed to speak out, to tell the people what was happening. Jim only shook his head. His time in politics was done, he said. It was her turn now. Martha refused. She wouldn't run for mayor. But Jim told her that whatever she chose, she would have his support. That night, the Batmobile glided beneath the harbor, its lights cutting through black water. Alfred sat in the cockpit, monitoring the sonar, guiding Bruce by voice. When they reached the island, Bruce slipped out of the vehicle and swam through the freezing depths, surfacing beneath the cliffs of Ark M. Alfred's voice crackled in his ear, reading out the old schematics. Bruce climbed the outer shell of the main pipeline until he reached the point where it vanished into the rock. The metal was slick and freezing under his gloves. He cut his way in with a plasma torch, then crawled through the narrow passage, his breath fogging the pipe's walls. Alfred told him he was still at least 100 meters below the prison. Bruce kept crawling. Eventually, he reached a grated opening. Through it, he saw something vast, a subterranean city of iron and concrete, stretching farther than the eye could see. The prison above was a facade. This was the true Ark M. He dropped silently into the complex. The communicator buzzed once, then went dead. Alfred's voice vanished. The corridors were dark, lined with old medical signage and rusted pipes. A thick glass window revealed a human-sized bat skeleton pinned like a specimen display. Bruce stepped closer, and in that instant, the sound of footsteps came behind him. He turned, and Bane's kick struck him square in the chest, sending him crashing into the wall. The air left his lungs in a sharp gasp. Bane didn't follow up. He stood motionless, watching, waiting. "Come," he said simply, voice low beneath the mask. Batman threw his bat thumbs, small bladed projectiles that struck Bane's chest and drew shallow cuts, but the giant didn't even flinch. He invited Bruce to attack again. Batman lunged forward, throwing a punch that Bane blocked with ease. A precise jab to Bruce's shoulder sent fire down his arm. It went limp. Another strike, and the other arm followed. Then one leg, each movement paralyzed by pinpoint nerve blows. Bruce, breathing hard, told him he could still fight. One leg was enough, no matter how juiced up Bane was. Bane tilted his head, the tubes along his arms beginning to throb. "Juiced up?" he repeated, almost amused. He hadn't even activated the serum yet. He did now. The hiss of pressure filled the air as the liquid pumped through his veins. His muscles swelled monstrously, stretching the fabric of his harness until it creaked. He reached down, grabbed Batman by the chest plate, and lifted him effortlessly off the ground. "It's time," Bane said, his voice a quiet growl beneath the sound of the machines, "to get you prepped for surgery." Absolute Batman Issue 10. When Bruce opened his eyes, the world was white and humming. He was naked on a steel cot, the light above him throbbing in slow, nauseating pulses. His body ached everywhere, dull, raw pain beneath the skin. The air smelled like antiseptic and rust. He realized dimly that he should not be awake. The sedation they had given him, he could still feel its weight in his veins, was designed to keep him under for 2 more days at least. Yet here he was. The doctors had taken everything, every weapon, every tool, every small secret he'd hidden within himself over the years had been carved out. But not all of them. He reached into his mouth, running his tongue along the roof until it caught on the tiny metallic edge. A lockpick, swallowed and hidden years ago, fused beneath scar tissue. He worked it free, spat blood, and went to work on the cell door. The sound of the tumblers echoed like distant thunder. Then it clicked. The door swung open into darkness. He ran barefoot down the corridor, the floor cold enough to bite. Alarms hadn't yet been triggered. Whatever kept this place alive wanted silence. He passed a glass enclosure, a vast, fogged cage containing a single, massive egg. The label bolted to the glass read, "Hellfeger Experiment." He didn't stop to wonder. Further on, he entered a chamber where the air grew heavy and sweet, thick with rot. The sign above the door said KLAY Biome. The floor beneath him moved. At first, he thought it was shifting mud, but as he looked closer, he saw flesh. Dozens of bodies fused together, faces half-formed, arms stretching up from the mass like roots reaching for air. They clutched at him when he stepped forward, hands slick and warm. He struggled free, but before he could escape, a shadow loomed behind him. Bane's blow came like a hammer. The world went black. 45 days passed. In his cell, Bruce no longer spoke. He barely moved. The guards fed him through a slot, though most of the food rotted untouched. The staff assumed he'd broken at last, that the legendary will of Batman had gone quiet. They were wrong. When the orderlies came for him, 4 of them, armed and careless, he rose. The first went down with a blow that shattered his jaw. Bruce's fists gleamed. His knuckle dusters were made from his own teeth. The others followed, bones snapping in a quick succession. He tore open his bedding, revealing a crude pouch of chemical sludge. His own urine, mixed with guano, scraped from the walls where bats nested above his cot. He pressed it to the wall and lit the fuse. The explosion ripped through the corridor, scattering dust and smoke. He sprinted through the gap into the dark once again. The glass cage reappeared before him, but the egg inside was cracked open, the shell wet and glistening. Something had hatched. He ran a different path this time, winding through damp tunnels until he reached a sheer vertical shaft. The wall was slick with condensation. He climbed, fingers clawing into cracks until he emerged into an open space bathed in green light. A forest spread before him. The sign on the gate read, "Isley Ecosystem." The air was thick with humidity, fragrant and wrong. As he stepped among the trees, he noticed their shapes. Human faces pressed into the bark, eyes twitching, mouths open in silent screams. Then the vines moved. They coiled around him, wrapping his arms, tightening. The ground split, and from the shadows came figures, human-shaped, their skin rough as bark, their eyes luminous with green fire. One of them spoke in a rasping chorus. "The green wants out." They surged toward him. One opened its mouth and vomited a mass of tendrils that forced their way into Bruce's nose, ears, eyes, every opening they could find. He fell to his knees, choking. Then, a deafening crack. Bane tore through the forest like a force of nature. He ripped the creature away and crushed it without hesitation, its remains dissolving into sap. Bruce tried to rise, but another punch from Bane sent him into the dark once more. Day 91. He had survived 44 days of torture and 2 weeks of surgeries. The first subject out of 27 to endure the full cycle. The others had all died screaming. Now Bruce was bald, his scalp pale and glistening beneath the fluorescent lights. His skin was covered in a lattice of green scars, glowing faintly under his veins. His eyes were hollow, his spirit seemingly gone. But Dr. Arkham, the man who ran this nightmare, wasn't convinced. Neither was Bane. They believed something of him still remained. As a test, they placed the batsuit in his cell. The armor, the utility belt, everything that once made him who he was. At first, he recoiled from it, crawling backward into the corner, whispering at it to go away. He shouted that there was no winning, that it was over. The guards watched, amused. Then, hours later, the camera feed flickered. When it came back online, the cell was empty, except for the hole in the wall. He had put the suit back on. He moved like a phantom through the corridors until he reached another chamber labeled Langstrom Experiment. Inside, cages lined the walls, and from them came the sounds of crying and scratching. When he stepped through, figures emerged, grotesque hybrids of human and beast. bat wings sprouting from twisted backs, limbs malformed, eyes filled with pleading. They surrounded him and begged him to kill them. Before he could answer, the room shook. Bane entered, calm and methodical, and began slaughtering the hybrids. Each one died screaming as his massive hands broke them apart. Bruce lunged at him, but Bane caught him mid-strike and threw him through a cage wall. Behind him, a new glass enclosure shattered. A giant egg sat within. Its shell cracked under the impact. Bane advanced, preparing to finish him, when something moved inside the egg. It exploded outward. A reptilian creature, green and wet with slime, lunged at Bane. Its tail whipped like a steel cable, sending the giant flying into the scientist's observation cage. The glass collapsed, crushing them beneath his body. 2 survivors scrambled away, but the monster caught them, dragging them back with a snap of its jaws. Blood splattered across the walls. Bruce rose unsteadily. He knew that shape, that voice, that power. Wayland. The creature's massive claw closed around Bruce's neck. For a moment, it seemed he would crush him too. But then the grip loosened. Wayland turned, growled low, and lowered himself. Bruce climbed onto his back. Together, they climbed the rock wall, their combined strength breaking through into the sewer tunnels. The air above was damp and cold, but it was freedom. Back in the ruins of the lab, Dr. Arkham emerged from the smoke, his eyes gleaming with manic anticipation. He turned to Bane, who wiped the blood from his mask. "Are you excited for the final phase?" Arkham asked. Bane straightened, the veins in his arms pulsing with venom. "Yes," he said quietly. "Now, I get to truly break Batman." Absolute Batman Issue 11. The plane descended through the fog that hung low over Gotham, the city's skyline cutting sharp and black against the clouds. When the ramp dropped, Bane stepped out. The concrete shook beneath his boots. He looked up at the spires, the towers, the lights glimmering like the eyes of a sleeping beast, and for the first time in months, the air didn't smell of antiseptic and blood. It smelled like home. He should have told Bruce. He should have warned him what was coming, what kind of creature Bane really was. But some truths, Alfred thought bitterly, rot the soul just by being spoken aloud. He remembered the stories, the ones whispered through the intelligence networks during his years in the service. The boy who had been born in chains, in a land that knew only invasion and rebellion. Santa Prisca, a Caribbean island rich with iron, sugar, and oil, plundered again and again, century after century. Each empire that took it left its mark. Burned villages, gutted hills, salt in the soil. The locals called their struggle Cielos Libre, the free skies. Bane's father had led them. He'd fought not for conquest, but for peace, for an end to the endless cycle of foreign greed. And for a brief moment, it had seemed he might succeed. Bane had been barely a man when the rebels finally took the capital. 3 days of celebration. 3 days of fragile hope. Then the sky filled with foreign gunships. The rebellion was crushed before the week was out. The survivors were dragged to the dungeons of Peña Duro, Santa Prisca's most infamous prison, a pit carved into the cliffs where the sea screamed against the stone like a living thing. 11 years passed. 11 years of darkness, starvation, and disease. 11 years where the boy became a man, and the man became something else entirely. Then one night, Bane led the surviving rebels in an uprising. They slaughtered the guards, stole a ship, and set sail to reclaim the island that had birthed them. Alfred could almost see it, the rusted vessel cutting through the black water, the waves glowing faintly with phosphorescence, the men's eyes burning with faith and vengeance. But when they reached the beach, there was no army waiting. Only a man in white, standing alone in the sand. The Joker. He spoke to Bane privately, though what passed between them that night had become the stuff of myth. Alfred knew enough to imagine the shape of it, the voice of temptation, the promise of order through chaos. The Joker told him that Santa Prisca's wars would never end, that every victory would only invite another invasion, that peace was an illusion. Bane had listened, and he had agreed. The Joker offered a bargain. In exchange for Bane's loyalty, he would use his power and money to make Santa Prisca untouchable, forever independent, forever rich, forever safe. Bane accepted. The Joker left the island the next day and never returned. But before he went, he gave Bane one final command, a test of loyalty. He told him to kill his father, and Bane obeyed. After that, the world changed. Bane became the Joker's weapon, a ghost that moved from country to country, killing presidents, toppling regimes, burning the world one piece at a time. His name became legend in black markets and war rooms alike. The Joker had given him purpose, and science had given him perfection. Bane submitted himself to the Venom program, experimental treatments that twisted his body into something beyond human. His muscles grew to impossible size, his reflexes sharpened, his mind accelerated. Pain no longer ruled him, he ruled it. The experiments granted him a photographic memory. He memorized every fighting style in existence, every weapon ever forged, every military strategy ever written. He could dismantle armies in hours, civilizations in weeks. Alfred closed his eyes. He could see what would happen next, see it as clearly as a nightmare that hadn't yet arrived. Bruce would face him. Of course he would. He'd fight until the last breath left his body. And he would lose. Because Bane didn't just fight, he studied, he anticipated, he countered. Every move Bruce made would already exist inside Bane's head, cataloged and dissected like a specimen. And when Bruce finally fell, when the inevitable came, Bane would deliver him to the Joker surgeons, the same way he had done with others before. They would strap Bruce to a table, fill his veins with the same serum that had made Bane. They would tell him the same story, that he could become what Gotham needed, that the venom could make him strong enough to save the city. Alfred shuddered, because he knew Bruce would refuse. He would never surrender his soul to that kind of power. And that, Alfred realized, was why Bane would not stop. Bane wouldn't try to break Batman. He would break the people Batman loved. One by one, in Gotham's underbelly, 3 men sat in the half-light of a ruined safe house: Eddie, Harvey, and Oz. They had stayed hidden, waiting for a sign from Bruce, for any word that he was alive. They never saw the door open. Bane filled the doorway like a shadow, silent and immense. His mask hissed softly with each breath. By the time any of them moved, it was already too late. Absolute Batman Issue 12. The water was black and cold as iron. Wayland moved through it like a beast of myth, his massive shoulders breaking the surface in slow, heavy strokes. Bruce hung against his back, half-conscious, his body trembling with exhaustion and pain. The lights of Gotham shimmered above them in the harbor mist, distorted by the oily waves. They slipped into the sewers, into the labyrinthine dark where the city's heartbeat echoed through dripping pipes. Wayland's voice broke the silence, low and guttural, barely human. He begged Bruce to save him. Bruce's throat burned as he answered. He promised he would. He told Wayland he would find a cure. But Wayland only shook his head, his breath hissing through sharp teeth. His voice turned raw with desperation. He didn't want to be saved. He wanted it to end. He wanted Bruce to kill him. Bruce's hand trembled as he drew a blade. He raised it toward Wayland's skull, his face pale with resolve. And then, at the last instant, he twisted the knife aside. He couldn't do it. Wayland grabbed his wrist, forcing the blade back toward his own head. They struggled, the knife flashing between them, their grunts echoing off the walls. Bruce broke free with a kick that struck Wayland square in the face, snapping the grip. Wayland reeled back, roaring in fury and heartbreak. He told Bruce that he should have left him in Ark M, that death there would have been mercy. Then with a final bellow, he plunged into the black water and vanished. Bruce called his name once, but only the sound of the sewer remained. When he next opened his eyes, he was home. The Batcave stretched above him in silence. Alfred sat nearby, his face pale and lined with grief. He told Bruce he had found him 20 days ago, collapsed on the cave floor, barely breathing. He had tended to him, waited for him to wake. But the damage ran deep. The Joker surgeons had implanted a venom delivery system directly into Bruce's brain and spine. Alfred warned that he needed more time to recover. Bruce didn't listen. He said he needed to get back out there. Alfred didn't argue. He only watched as Bruce rose and left, his steps uneven, his shadow long on the cave's stone walls. Outside, Gotham was rain-soaked and gray. Bruce walked through the streets until a sudden pain hit him like a lightning strike. His vision blurred. His veins lit up bright green beneath his skin, pulsing with the poison in his blood. He leaned against a wall until the pain ebbed, then kept walking. Martha's apartment door flew open. She saw him and crossed the room in 2 strides, slapping him across the face before pulling him into a desperate embrace. Her tears soaked his collar. She told him that while he was gone, Ozzy had been attacked. Bruce went straight to the hospital. The sight that met him froze his blood. Ozzy lay in traction, his body twisted and broken, every bone shattered, his face barely recognizable. He whimpered when he breathed. Bruce didn't need to ask who had done it. He knew. Bane. Leslie Tompkins met him in the hallway, her voice hushed. She told him Harvey was in the next room. Bruce stepped inside. Harvey's skull had been split down the center. One half of his face was a ruin of burned flesh. His good eye watched Bruce with cold detachment. He said that when they were kids, a truant officer named Flass used to warn him that his friends would bring him down one day. He had been right. Bruce tried to apologize, to take the blame, but Harvey cut him off. It was his fault, all of it. Then, after a long pause, Harvey told him to leave. But as Bruce turned to go, he added that, if it was any consolation, he only hated him half the time. Eddie's workshop smelled of oil and ozone. Bruce found him sitting at his desk, a smile stretched unnaturally wide across his face. Eddie said he was fine, that Bane hadn't hurt him. Bruce almost believed it until he stepped closer and saw. The back of Eddie's skull was missing. Thick cables ran into the exposed tissue, snaking from a machine humming in the corner. Eddie cheerfully explained that Bane had challenged him to a gentlemanly battle of wits. When Bruce asked what had happened, Eddie said Bane had beaten him in the contest, then gripped his head in both hands and shaken it until his eyes ruptured and his frontal lobe tore. And yet, Eddie was happy. The brain damage had twisted his mind into elation. He said Bane had given them all a chance to become more than they were meant to be, to evolve. Then Bruce saw it. The android owl's head, grafted crudely to Eddie's own, still leaking blood where metal met skin. Bruce told him he needed to get to a hospital, but before he could continue, the pain came again. His left arm flared with agony, veins swelling and glowing sickly green beneath his skin. Eddie tilted his head, smiling through the blood. He said it looked like Bane had challenged Bruce too, and asked him what he was going to do about it. Bruce returned to the Batcave, his body shaking, his mind burning. He opened a channel to his contact in the Red Hood gang and told them to stand down. The war was over. Alfred was waiting. Bruce said Alfred had been right, that he should have just taken Black Mask's money. Alfred asked if he was shutting down the mission. Bruce's fury snapped. He shouted that Bane had broken his friends. Alfred didn't raise his voice. He said yes, Bane had broken them. But would Bruce let him break him too? Bruce said nothing. Alfred told him that everything had changed. There was no going back, only forward. Then the alarm sounded. Someone had breached the hatch. Alfred's expression hardened. "It must be Bane," he said, and reached for a weapon. They spread out through the cave, weapons ready, breath shallow. The silence stretched until a metallic hiss broke it. A mechanical tendril slithered down one of the support columns and wrapped around Alfred's throat. He choked out a warning before a shadow dropped from above. A figure in black armor, helmet smooth and featureless, shaped with cat-like ears. The figure struck, swift and efficient, and Alfred crumpled. Bruce turned, his heart hammering. He demanded to know what they were doing there. The figure stepped forward, silent. He recognized the outline, the motion, the grace. Selina. Absolute Batman Issue 13. The moment the figure's helmet hit the cave floor, Bruce demanded to know why she was back in Gotham. Selina's eyes gleamed under the cave lights, sharp, feline, unreadable. She told him that Martha had called her after he disappeared, that she'd come back to help. Behind them, Alfred stirred, groaning as he sat up. His vision cleared, and when he saw her, his expression hardened. He called her by the name the underworld used: Catwoman, a mercenary, a thief without allegiance. He warned Bruce not to trust her. He'd heard what she'd done in Malaysia. Bruce didn't argue. He said he didn't need the warning. Then he turned to Selina and told her to leave Gotham immediately. He threw her out of the cave. But when the night deepened and the city went quiet, they found each other again. In the dark of his apartment, the anger dissolved into something else. They moved together like two old wounds reopening, familiar and painful. In the morning, Selina awoke first. Bruce was sitting on the edge of the bed, the light cutting across his back. His skin was a map of scars, some old, some fresh, and some that glowed faintly green beneath the surface, tracing the damage Ark M had left behind. She asked him what they'd done to him there. He turned his head, eyes distant. He asked if that was really what she wanted to talk about. After a moment, she admitted that it wasn't. He noticed her helmet resting on the table. Its design was sleek, polished, too familiar. He pointed out that it resembled black masks. She said nothing, and he said they didn't have to talk about that either. Instead, he asked her out. A date, he called it. Hours later, they stood on the decaying boardwalk of Amusement Mile. The lights were long dead, the air thick with salt and rust. The pier had become the stronghold of the Red Hood gang, and they didn't take kindly to visitors. Red masks appeared from the shadows, guns glinting under the moon. Their leader shouted that Batman wasn't welcome there. He had ordered them to stand down once, had tried to command them, and they took orders from no one. Batman's voice was calm when he told them he wasn't leaving until he spoke to their leader. The first Red Hood charged, then the next. Bruce and Selina moved as one, their strikes clean and efficient. She dropped the first with a dart from her tranquilizer gun. Bruce swept through the rest, his movements precise, controlled. But above them, on the rusting skeleton of the Ferris wheel, another Red Hood took aim with an RPG. Bruce saw the flare of ignition and shoved Selina aside. The venom in his veins erupted. His muscles surged, his veins glowing bright green beneath his skin. He turned toward the Ferris wheel, fury overtaking reason. The rocket fired. With a roar, he slammed into the support beams, shattering the structure's base. The wheel tore free, rolling once before collapsing into the sea. The Red Hood on top screamed as the metal plunged after him, swallowed by the black water. The remaining gang members froze. One of them muttered that Batman was one of them, one of the monsters their leader had warned them about. Selina stepped forward, voice soft, steady. She told Bruce to breathe, to stop. Slowly, his breathing steadied. The light beneath his skin faded. When he spoke again, his voice was hoarse. He told them that he'd been inside Ark M, that it was a place where monsters were made, and that he had nearly become one of them. But he escaped, and now he was going to destroy it. Destroy Bane. Destroy everyone who built it. A figure emerged from the shadows, twirling a pistol with a painted grin. Harley Quinn. She smiled and told him that if he planned to burn Ark M to the ground, the Red Hoods were in. Far beneath the earth, in the cold halls of Ark M, Dr. Arkham watched green fluid flow through a maze of tubes. It pulsed into the veins of the man on the table, Bane. The machines beeped steadily as she recorded the infusion level. He had reached maximum venom saturation. Bane's voice was calm, distant. He said that soon they would have Batman, that Batman would take his place, and when that happened, he could finally go home. Arkham asked him if he truly believed the Joker would ever let him leave. There was a pause. Then Bane said he had to believe it. A voice called out. One of the technicians had turned up the volume on a nearby monitor. The television screen flickered to life. Batman's face filled the broadcast. He had hijacked the signal. His message was simple. He challenged Bane to a fight at the old Veterans Arena. If Bane won, Batman said, he would return to Ark M willingly and become whatever Bane wanted him to be. "But I won't lose," Batman added, and the transmission cut out. In the cave, Selina watched the feed end. Her expression was a mix of awe and dread. She told Bruce not to use the venom. She had seen what it did to people. He told her it was the only way to win, and that he could control it. She said he didn't need to do it alone, that she could help him, but he refused. He wouldn't let her go through what the others had. He reminded her of something she'd once told him, that they didn't have to play by the rules if the rules were unfair. She said she'd been wrong. He looked at her sharply. He told her she hadn't gotten to where she was by playing fair. She admitted it, but she said he was better than her. He turned away. Not anymore. The silence that followed was heavy. He told her that if she couldn't handle what came next, she should leave. Selina's face hardened. She walked toward the exit. Alfred, standing nearby, muttered that she shouldn't let the door hit her on the way out. She didn't answer. Bruce loaded the Batmobile with a cooler filled with raw meat, the smell filling the cave. He checked his gear, his weapons, the injections. Before he left, Alfred spoke quietly. He told Bruce that to win, he would have to bury the man he used to be and become the monster he needed to be. Bruce said nothing. He drove into the sewers, the roar of the engine echoing through the tunnels. In the darkness ahead, something stirred. From the black water, a massive shape rose. Scales glistened under the dim light, eyes burning faintly gold. Wayland watched as the Batmobile passed, his head just above the surface. Then he sank back beneath the water, vanishing into the depths as Bruce sped toward his final battle. That's where we'll leave it today. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see my future Absolute Batman videos as they come out, and drop a comment if there's a specific comic run you'd like me to cover. This has been Geek Inc., signing off.